Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you a part of a bigger picture that I'm working on. I'm working on trafficking, human trafficking, how does it work, and the borders. Because I found a huge deal with the borders that really needs its own session. But before I get to that part, I need to talk about some definitions because through the border part, I keep running across the same people. Like I run across ISIS, that mafia group. Remember the group that was smuggling the tomatoes and stuff? So I thought, and also today I'm going to be talking specifically about snuff films. Remember in the past I talked about this man from Scotland Yard. I think he was the head of Scotland Yard. I saw him in an interview and I even posted a clip at the time because I was so startled when he sat there in front of the camera and said, no one has ever discovered a snuff film in the entire world. Never been discovered. So as part of this trafficking thing, I want to explore snuff film because where do you think they get the people to kill for snuff film? Well, probably trafficking, right? And what does trafficking mean? Well, moving people around borders. And there is a big hole in the border system, but it's too big for me to get there right now. So I posted the piece down below as far as this attorney will explain to you how to secure your Wi-Fi router. I suggest you take it seriously because I think likely in these fusion centers, they're teaching the cops how to disable your Wi-Fi. But some serious mistakes are taking place because the cops do not really know much about IP addresses and they've broken into the wrong homes thinking it was the wrong IP address. So they don't understand the very basics because my IP, if you looked at it, you'd think that I was in Omaha. Well, I'm not in Omaha. I'm in Norfolk, about an hour outside of Omaha. So lots of room for mistakes. So there's some specific instructions that you really need to know about to take care of your router to make sure the cops can't easily tap into it. So one of the groups that I keep running across is ISIS. Now, I talked in the past about ISIS being created by the United States, but I have a lot more details today. When I was looking at the border business and the people, I found statements like ISIS is among terrorist groups using slaves to recruit rapists and domestic abusers. So part of the ISIS strategy was they were using slaves and saying, hey, come join us and we'll give you a slave or you can rape these people, right? So they were attracting a certain type, right, of domestic abusers. Then I found another headline, how Telegram, the app, Telegram, if you don't get rid of those apps, I don't know what to tell you to do to save yourself, but get rid of all those apps. They're spying on you nonstop. So anyway, the headline was how Telegram was used by the Islamic State to trade slaves. Here again, where are they getting the bodies from, right? Well, they're getting the body across the borders. So because I keep running into ISIS and the mafia people over there in Italy, I thought, because 8 years ago, my thinking at the time was, well, this might be an interesting way, instead of going away and gathering all the data about psychopaths are doing to society and writing another book, I thought, well, maybe I would focus on just sharing my work as I went along. And I'm glad I made that decision because I'm obviously not going to be alive long enough to write another book. So I have so many files I'm trying to communicate while I still can, and there's a huge gap in this trafficking deal around the world, but not for today. What I'm going to do today is talk about what would be in a couple chapters if I ever wrote that book. Because first we need to sort out some things about ISIS, because I keep jumping into them. And we need to understand this snuff thing about snuff films. And here again, before I get started, Trump has deployed to LA, has done precisely one thing. They sent almost 5,000 soldiers to Los Angeles. They detained one man briefly. They spent about $134 million. So, yeah, well, people are falling for it like crazy, right? Everybody yelling back and forth. Okay, so let's get started here. I think this is a direct comparison to Rome. And I'm just going by my instincts because this snuff film business, the Coliseum, the way that they do voting in this country, it all seems, and I have not studied Roman history. I'm just going by what my instincts are saying because people say, well, the U.S. will fall just like Rome did. Well, so why is that? Why are people saying that? And how do things like these snuff films, watching other people get murdered, fit into this? Well, actually, it's a pretty interesting connection. Many commentators, historians, and critics draw parallels between the Roman Empire's decline and perceived vulnerabilities in the U.S. today. And remember, I believe that this is part of a big game show. I think they constructed this Roman history and all of this stuff. Remember, history means his story, right? So I think all of this was constructed along with the Bible. The Bible and the history are their guiding path through this. Is any of it true? Well, I don't know, but I believe that they believe it's true to base their actions on it, right? So every movie has to have a new script, right? So on this game board, this is a script. The script is this was the Roman Empire, right? So why or how they write it, don't ask me, because they're psychopaths, right? You have to have a reason for what you're going to be doing, right? Okay, so what are some of the common themes? Well, because of the corruption and elite decadence, like the Romans, senators, and emperors, some say America's political and economic elites prioritize self-interest over the common good. And also that's true amongst people. People are entirely self-interested. Until it happens to them, you're not going to get much of a response out of them. So, elections as spectacles, just as Roman emperors and politicians used gladiator games and bread to distract the masses, some argue U.S. elections, especially when influenced by big money or media manipulation, serves as theater rather than true democracy. Overextension. Rome overreached militarily and economically. What are we, like 38 trillion in debt? Critics point to the U.S.'s global military footprint and national debt as signs of similar overreach. You think so? Social division. Rome suffered from growing inequity and civil unrest, and the U.S. faces rising political polarization, economic inequality, and cultural fragmentation. And the gladiators versus the elections. Bread and circus is what they called it. Roman leaders kept the public pacified with free reign and mass entertainment while eroding freedoms. Modern analogy. Some feel that the U.S. spectacle, politics, endless campaigns, and media drama distract from systemic issues like corporate influence, surveillance, erosion of rights. Is the decline inevitable? Rome's decline took centuries and had many causes: political chaos, economic troubles, invasions, plagues, and internal decay. So Rome's spectacle, gladiator games, executions, beast hunts, naval battles were public entertainments where people watched others suffer and die. The violence wasn't hidden. It was institutionalized and glorified. These events, in other words, gladiator games and executions, served as political purposes to distract the masses from society problems, bread and circuses, to reinforce state power and imperial values, to create a shared public experience of Roman dominance over life and death. Well, so snuff films. A snuff film, by definition, would depict a real murder carried out for the purpose of commercial entertainment. Unlike Roman spectacles, snuff films, whether real or mythological, represent violence as hidden, illegal, taboo, yet possibly consumed in the shadows for profit or thrill. The concept of snuff films often reflects moral panics, fears about the dark side of media, and anxieties about what society tolerates or enables. So, what was the comparison between Rome's bloody games and snuff films they're using today? Rome used death as public entertainment. Snuff films are death as secret underground entertainment. Rome's bloody games were state-sponsored, open violence. Snuff films are supposedly criminal, clandestine, violence. Rome's bloody games use pacify, control, and to impress the masses. Snuff film mythology reflects fears of moral decay, hidden networks, and exploitation. Rome's bloody games used violence as a tool of empire and order. The snuff film analogy to that was violence as the ultimate commodified transgression. Rome's bloody games signified public participation. Whole societies watched. The snuff film's mythology was supposedly consumed by a hidden, depraved few. What does this comparison tell us? Well, in both cases, violence is commodified and tied to power. Rome institutionalized what we today frame as horror or taboo, death for spectacle. The snuff film legend reflects modern society's fear that beneath our civilized exterior lurks the same appetite for destruction, but now hidden, fragmented, and illegal. What it says to me is that we're around a lot of very sick psychopaths, and this is the reality they have created for all of us. And by everybody looking away, it is continuing to this day. So while Rome's violence was ritualized and visible, the modern snuff film idea represents our anxiety about violence hidden in the shadows, as well as doubts about whether society truly evolved beyond bloodlust or simply disguised it. The Romans' attitude was, as long as I'm safe. In the later Roman Empire, and especially the Empire, many Roman citizens, especially the urban poor and middle classes, became focused on immediate survival or personal comfort, not on broader civic duty. If they got bread and circuses, free grain, and spectacular games, they tolerated corruption, cruelty, and decline of freedoms. Political violence, imperial overreach, and moral decay were ignored or accepted because for most people, the system still seemed to provide for them personally. Wealthy elites often withdrew into private luxury, unconcerned with the growing plight of the province or structured weakness of the empire. So some criticism, the people that once bestowed commands, consulships, legions, and all else now meddles no more and longs eagerly for just two things, bread and circuses. Today, we see similar attitudes. We see people disengaged from large-scale problems, injustice, corruption, environmental collapse, mass surveillance, and trafficking, unless it touches their personal life. Modern distraction like entertainment, consumerism, social media can play a role similar to Roman games, providing escape rather than engagement. Yeah, everybody is doing exactly like they wanted them to do. They want us divided and separated. They haven't changed much since the old divide and conquer, right? I can barely get anybody to acknowledge my work. I'm not saying that from a point of ego. I'm saying that from a point of being a fellow person in the same condition. One would think if somebody's sharing with you information, one would have the courtesy to say, oh, thank you, that was interesting. Or maybe I can add something to your work. But no, instead of any input, I get crickets. Crickets. I raked in $75 in donations like last month. It was about 1/4 of what I needed. I felt like it was a victory because the awareness for evil is so low and nobody wants to hear about it. Nobody wants to hear about it. If you tell them something bad that happened in your life, you will get shuffled off so fast you won't even remember why you brought up the conversation. Like I told you as an example, I got tossed into county jail when I was in Silicon Valley during that horrible lawsuit. Got some horrible advice from these crooked attorneys, and I ended up spending a night in jail. So when I went to tell a couple of people who I thought were my friends, I was pretty horrified. I mean, if you've ever spent a night in jail, you would also be equally horrified. So yeah, what did I hear from the couple of people I tried to talk to? Well, you should sue them. Well, why don't you talk to me about my story first instead of coming in with the conclusion? So we have become a society of disruptors, not a society of empathy, but a society that really doesn't want the other person to answer when you ask them, how are you, right? I guess it's a lot of work to actually try to engage, and that is exactly the role they want people to be in. So good job, everybody. Everybody's off in their own isolated little corners. Well, all along, the evil is continuing. But I'll hop off my stool right now and get back to business here. But let me take a quick break here because it's kind of crazy weather here today. Okay, I just finished the modern echo. If it doesn't affect me, why care? And then I moved into my rant, and now I'm back picking it up. Yes, it's very frustrating because I'm working on such blind space, but I will just proceed along. I am very, very tired and very, very sick, so you'll have to excuse me. I never said I was perfect. So why is this attitude dangerous? Rome's neglect of the common good and indifference to suffering beyond one's own circle hollowed out the moral and civic core of the empire. When real crises came, like the barbarian invasions, economic collapse, and the plagues, the society lacked the cohesion and sense of shared purpose needed to respond effectively. Gee, it just sounds just like it is right now. Just exactly like it is right now. Roman writers consistently warn when citizens stop caring for the public good, decline follows. Distraction and luxury are tools of decay. Civic virtue is what sustains a republic or empire. And also, not having a population run by psychopaths is also a good place to start. So let's get into some of these details about why am I talking about ISIS and trafficking and all of that. Well, come to find out, ISIS has quite a business in human trafficking. And ISIS has also become the big drug dealer over them. Well, I found an article that said how Syria became the Middle East drug dealer. Well, that's because of ISIS. So the Islamic State continues to create some semblance of a functioning government across what region was once belonging to Syria and Iraq. In addition to opposing its rule, ISIS has engaged in the oil industry, an enterprise that could net the group hundreds of millions of dollars, further funding its criminal operation. Yet beyond oil, ISIS is deeply involved in another black market enterprise, the grim and brutal business of human trafficking. This industry escalated dramatically when ISIS captured the city of Sinjar, that's Sinjar, home of the Yezidi, Yezidi, religious minority. I knew nothing about this group. This is why I do what I do. I stand in solidarity to these people. It's still going on. Viewing the Yazidis as heretical to their brand of Islam, ISIS carried out the wholesale slaughter of civilians and displaced hundreds of thousands of Sinjar's residents. For those who were captured, death was not necessarily the worst fate that could befall them. So ISIS captured the city of Sinjar on August the 3rd, 2014. This attack marked the beginning of a brutal campaign of violence against the Yezidis community. ISIS forces overran the city, slaughtered thousands of civilians, and kidnapped thousands of women and children for enslavement, particularly sexual slavery. The assault on Sinjar is considered by many as an act of genocide against the Yezidi people. And I found this article. This is how this whole thing got started. Remember the whole thing that I did with figuring out the crustaceans and all of that? I found that just by I found one story about they were selling white slave women in Turkey. And from that one story, I was able to track how they changed us into being white people. And I was able to also find where all those orphan trained children came from. So you never know where one story will lead you, right? And this is a very, very sad story. So I first learned of ISIS human trafficking operation from my friend and former interpreter, Dakin. He told me of his 10-year-old niece abducted by ISIS fighters to be used for sexual slavery. Since then, reports of atrocities committed by ISIS against women and girls as young as 9 have only grown. The scale and cruelty of this trafficking industry remains a dark stain on the region's history. The international community continues to grapple with how to bring justice to the victims and hold the perpetrators accountable. And here's the story. a 14-year-old Yezidi girl named Abenda lived in a small village outside of Sinjar, was trafficked by ISIS. With dozens of other girls, she was trafficked around North Iraq. At each city they stopped at, some of the girls were given as gifts to ISIS fighters, ostensibly to improve their morale by allowing them to rape little girls. This was after the ISIS commander got first dibs on them to take their virginity. Others who were not given away as girls are sold as slaves at a slave auction in cities like Mosul, the opening bid starting around $10. Forced marriages are also in order, and one Shia girl named Nada from Amarli decided to shoot herself in the head rather than allow herself to be married off to an ISIS fighter. She knew the fate that awaited her. When other Iraqis from Amarli returned, they found 15 women who had been raped and then hanged from a pipe by cable wire. Some wealthy Yazidis also were trying to buy back abducted girls, but with limited success. Of the 15 girls that were recovered, 3 of them killed themselves once they were freed, unable to live with the shame of being raped. Adiba was one of the lucky ones. When she was trafficked to Rabia, she managed to escape due to the fact that control of the city was sharply contested by the PKK. In a moment of chaos, she fled and made her way to Dahuk. She told Reuters that, "I know I was lucky. God saved me." But for the thousands of other Yazidi girls and women, God is sitting this one out. Okay, I am determined to get through this file. We'll continue on. This has really been a long, windy trail for me because I started out looking at trafficking routes. When I figured out the logistics, they know what countries now are hosting the snuff films, that I'll be getting to in a second here. They can tell that by their public IP addresses, where people go to download the stuff. And people know, so there's people out there that know where these porn sites are being run out of, okay? So let's say they're being run out of Amsterdam, okay? And I'll be getting more specific to that later. But what I discovered was this. I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, yeah, that's good that that's where they're originating from, but where is the actual activity taking place? In other words, where is the filming being done? And where are the people coming from that they're using for all these trafficking things coming from, right? Well, then we get back to these trafficking routes, right? Well, come to find out, I kept thinking and thinking, and then most of the filming is being done in Hungary. Well, who's in Hungary now? Well, NATO. Hello, good morning, NATO. So NATO, because remember how the other trafficking works, they have the mafia people. Remember the mafia group in Belgium? Not in Belgium, excuse me, the mafia group out of Amsterdam, okay? Doing all the drugs, right? And whoops, they didn't know they were operating for all those years, and now it's too late to reel them back in. Okay, that's the first, those Moroccan mafia, the Moroccos I just talked about from the last few months. So you got those people over there, and so anyway, so the mafia is controlling that part through Amsterdam, okay? And then the goods, then the snuff films and I don't know about snuff films maybe going dark web, but just the general, the pornography and all that gets funneled through Belgium, and then it feeds into Europe, is how that route works. When I wanted to find out where it's coming from and where they're getting these people from. So it's been kind of a windy trail. So I found it kind of interesting that NATO just happens to have a new base over in the Hungary region where I believe the filming is taking place, but I'll be getting much more into that in the next show. So because, I just had to think about the logistics. Just because people their ISP is over in Amsterdam doesn't mean that's where the production is, right? So that's when I finally started ratcheting around because there's a lot about these people. And that's how I ran into the story about Iraq that had to do with today's show. You know what I mean? So everything started going in circles over this ISIS business. And to show you further how they're all working together, and I'll be getting into more of ISIS in a second here. Remember the guy that was killed out of Iraq? Let me get his name here. There was a death of the very high-level Iranian guy, which got all this started. Soleimani is the guy's name, okay? Quasar Soleimani. Sorry, I'm having a hard time today. Quasar Soleimani. Remember that guy? Soleimani. He was supposedly struck by a drone attack right after Trump took office. And actually, I remember this very well because it was because of this incident, not completely because of that, but I deleted my Twitter account. I had a large following on Twitter at the time, but I discovered that the people that I was surrounded with were all controlled opposition, kind of got to a little bit of a tussle over things. And so anyway, and also it was not a good use of my time. So I just don't have the ability to hang around social media. It would have been nice if people would have shared my work for me. But anyway, so enough of that. So anyway, so I was on Twitter and this guy, Soleimani, was supposedly killed, and I couldn't find any evidence that he was really killed. For example, there was a ring that they claimed that he wore, because they said he was just all of a sudden, boom, gone, and he was at this airport. Well, they found this ring, right? They didn't find any DNA, nothing like that. And so I was really suspicious. And so the people that were on Twitter, they were like, they were like putting his picture in their Twitter account stuff. So all these people from Yemen, everybody was like all on board with this guy as a hero, right? And remember, Soleimani was a guy, I talked about him when Iran was doing their big vaccine campaign for COVID. They did because he's a national hero, they used him as their guy to say, oh, take the shot for him. He died for us kind of thing. Well, let me tell you what really happened to him, okay? So you start to see when I'm talking next about the routes, because I did a show not that long ago that the drug route is in fact going through Iran, right? And Iran is in fact surrounded by U.S. military bases. These are all facts. I mean, thanks to the people in the blog world, this isn't like mystery meat here. I'm not just grasping for straws. This is stuff people have worked hard to get through FOIA requests and stuff. So let me tell you about this guy. So, because this guy, I'm back at Mauritania because of this guy. So I'll share with you how that happened. So it said, the report was, alleged death of CIA operative Michael Ndrangheta in Afghanistan, okay? This is how convoluted I can find my way around sometimes. So the article said, Russian intelligence sources have claimed that Michael Ndrangheta, head of CIA operations in Iran, and a key figure in orchestrating the assassination of CIA. So let me back up here. Michael Ndrangheta was the head of CIA operations in Iran. So he was a USA person and a key figure in orchestrating the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, who was killed when a U.S. spy plane was down in Ghazni, Afghanistan. The incident was reported. So the details of what happened is Michael Ndrangheta, his plane got taken down, okay? And that's where the story unfolds about his involvement with taking down the other guy. I know it's like working a crime novel, right? So the aircraft he was in was marked with U.S. Air Force insignia, was said to function as the CIA's mobile command center for Ndrangheta, the guy who was shot down. The Taliban claimed responsibility for shooting down the plane, though they have not provided evidence to support this. The United States, however, denied that the Taliban brought down the plane, but did acknowledge the loss of a Bombardier E-11A aircraft in central Afghanistan. Graphic image circulating online appear to show the charred remains of those on board. Afghan authorities initially identified the aircraft as belonging to a state-owned airline, Ariana, but this was later denied by the airline. When the Taliban have successfully targeted helicopters in the past, they are not believed to have the capacity to bring down a high-flying aircraft of this type. So there were speculations of Iran was actually involved in taking this guy's thing down. So there was speculation that the Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard may have been involved in the incident. In other words, taking down this CIA guy, right, who was stationed in Iran. The IRGC has previously provided anti-aircraft support to the Taliban. The Afghan Shia Brigade, trained by the IRGC, also maintained a presence in Afghanistan. An exiled Iranian journalist who has written for the hardline Javan newspaper suggested the IRGC's involvement, stated on social media. He stated this: the American Gulfstream plane was downed in Afghanistan by the Taliban. They say that intelligence officers were on board. This report has not yet been confirmed, but if it is possible that the issue of Iran will also emerge in this case. Another Iranian journalist writing for Mashika newspaper, known for its links to the IRGC, commented, "We will attack them on the same level as they are attacking us." Soleimani's successor as head of the Quds Air Force, Esmet Khomeini, has long-standing ties in Afghanistan. IRGC Commander General Hossein Salami has warned that no American military commanders will be safe if U.S. threats against Iranian commanders continue. So, what's the background of this guy they claim they got shot down? Michael D. Andrea, nicknamed Ayatollah Mike, the Dark Prince, and the Undertaker, was appointed as head of the CIA's Iran Mission Center in 2017, making a shift toward a more aggressive U.S. posture on Iran. He converted to Islam reportedly in order to marry his Muslim wife, who comes from a really wealthy Jukartian, that's Gujarati family from Mauritius. And I went off on a spin here because I thought they were talking about Mauritania. So the reason I'm telling you about this crash, which really, I mean, am I that concerned about who shot him down? Well, not particularly. But what I want to point out is if in the future, if anyone takes my work and wants to explore it further, keep in mind this. I think some of these words they put in sound the same because it misdirects us, right? So Mauritius. So I thought it was Mauritania. Okay. So if you read the word Mauritius, it's not Mauritania. Okay. But anyway, so it was an interesting story about who shot this guy down, right? But I don't know. Did he get shot down? Well, I don't know. They said De Andreas played a central role in numerous CIA operations, including oversight of hundreds of drone strikes, which killed thousands of Islamic militants and hundreds of civilians, according to the New York Times. De Andrea was also involved in the development of the CIA's controversial signature strike tactic, targeting individuals based on behavior rather than confirmed identity. That's always a good trick, right? They just want to kill us no matter what. So De Andrea was also responsible for the management of the post-9/11 interrogation program, including the use of torture. Another good reason to probably shoot him down, right? He was involved in the oversight of the hunt for Osama bin Laden. Well, another false flag, but most people believed it was true. So another good reason why the Middle East might want to shoot him down, right? He was also involved in the assassination of his Hezbollah member, Ahmad Mughati, in Damascus. Another good reason, right? So the guy sounded like he might have been a walking target. But anyway, at one time, claims regarding De Andrea's death remains unconfirmed. The U.S. has not acknowledged his death or confirmed the details surrounding the downed aircraft. The situation remains under investigation. So anyways, that was just an interesting little side story. So we're really talking about Mauritania. And I hit gold on this one. My efforts to look at Mauritania have really paid off. Remember, I started looking at Mauritania just based on the fact they're right across the water from Spain, right? And they wear fez hats. I've been spending time touring around Mauritania, whatever I could find on YouTube. And believe it or not, Mauritania has like this huge palace in that country. So there's a lot going on in Mauritania. And I finally am figuring out why I was looking at Mauritania. I just get these instincts and I just don't let them go until I'm done with them, right? So let me give you a real refresher. Mauritania is in northwest Africa, bordered by Western Sahara, Algeria, those fez hats, right? Mali and Senegal, and a long Atlantic coast. See the long Atlantic coast, right? It lies on key smuggling routes between West Africa, North Africa, and Europe. And that's why I first started looking there, but I wasn't really sure why I was looking there. And now we know. Mauritania is also a huge trafficking hub, drug trafficking. Mauritania is a major transit point for cocaine from Latin America heading to Europe. Latin America cartels ship cocaine to Western African coasts. Traffickers move it through Mauritania, see, often via desert routes. Well, they're pretty hardy people because just to have some fun, go look up Mauritania on YouTube. I mean, when people travel to get there, they travel. I mean, they have cars that are so rickety, they're held together like with bungee cords and duct tape. I mean, they will fix anything, okay? So to get to Mauritania, you go on these long desert routes. I mean, brutal desert routes. So, and people all cooperate because if your bus stops on the way to Mauritania, you wait for another bus to come along that will help you out. And you hope the sand doesn't blow over you. So it's actually a very fascinating route. And you've got to be pretty sturdy. And that was what first intrigued me because I started thinking, Mauritania, right across the water there, wear those fez hats, and very hard to get to. But what really got my attention, these people just can't stop with the luxury, right? Was that palace at Mauritania. That's what got my attention and kept me looking at Mauritania. So yeah, so now we know more as of today, right? So you gotta always follow your instincts, and no matter what anybody says. I mean, 30 years ago, people, well, they still say it now, but people say that's crazy. We're not surrounded by psychopaths. You must be crazy. Well, turns out I'm not so crazy after all. Now, am I? Because we are in fact surrounded by psychopaths. So just be careful who you go after. So anyway, so yeah, big traffic route from Latin America. Now, I wouldn't have guessed Latin America, right? But yeah, that's how it's traveling. The remote desert terrain makes it hard to control. Corruption at some levels of government and security forces enables smuggling. And the other thing too, I don't know if you remember that or not, but Mauritania, they also only lived to be about 40 years old in that area. It's rugged there. It's rugged. But I have to say, I like the people there. If I could have hopped on a plane and gone and visited there, that would have been the one location. If somebody said to me in all the years you've been investigating this stuff, where would you want to visit? Mauritania. And that's where I want to go. So, Mauritania is on routes for migrants from sub-African trying to reach Europe via Morocco, Western Sahara to Spain's Canary Islands, to overland to Libya. And remember, when they're coming through Spain, they got that Spain exception going on. So the books are tricked in Spain. So all they have to do is get the people up into Spain and then they got it made, right? Some migrants become victims of forced labor, prostitution rings, or organ trafficking along the journey. Slavery and bonded labor still exists in Mauritania itself, despite official bans. People of darker-skinned African descent, they're the Haratins or other groups, are especially vulnerable. Arms and contraband. The same routes move weapons, counterfeit goods, and other illicit cargo. Terror groups, including AQIM and criminal gangs, tax or control parts of these routes. Always got the mafia there, right? So I have a bunch of reports if you want to if you want to dig in a little further because I dug up all the reports I could find on Mauritania. The UN has some Mauritania's role in cocaine trafficking in West Africa. They have the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, and that highlights Mauritania as a key node in West African smuggling. And I bet you probably thought I was crazy when I was going on and on about Mauritania. Look who's crazy now, right? So there's also a report in the U.S. Department of Trafficking, a persons report. documenting Mauritania's issues with human trafficking, forced labor, and slavery. So Mauritania is indeed a trafficking hub for drugs, people, and other contraband. They say its geography, weak state control in remote areas, and corruption fuel its role. So, yeah. So I also have some lists because, well, so if you pick up Mauritania, just remember you don't want to look at Mauritius. Mauritius is actually an island nation, and that also is where Muslim elites live. So anyway, so they say that some of the richer Muslims live in Mauritius. So yeah, so don't get confused by the way. So another part of background logistics here. Recently in Syria, remember they had Bashar al-Assad just happened to take off from Syria, right? Him and his wife or husband or whoever. Well, he's really playing a role, but yeah, he supposedly is in Russia right now. So there was a new guy that took over Syria. Well, just to document it all, the new guy is just like the old guy. And let me explain to you why I'm saying that. So I had to ask ChatGPT because I said, who's the new guy in Syria? Because I couldn't remember his name. I can't even pronounce his name, let alone remember them. So it said, from your description, it sounds like you're pointing to Abu Muhammad al-Jolan, also spelled Giuliani. He's a leader, and I won't get too complicated. I'm just going to do a couple things here, okay? Because we want to tie these strings to them before we get into the actual routes and stuff. So Al-Jolani is the leader of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Let's just call it the HTS. It's the dominant militant group in Idlib. That's in Syria. IDLIB. Okay, so Al-Jolani is the leader of HTS in Idlib, northwest Syria. He was formerly a senior figure in Al-Qaeda in Iraq, then leader of the Al-Qaeda's official branch in Syria. Al-Jolani broke with Al-Qaeda officially in 2016, rebranding himself as a local Syrian force rather than a global jihadist group. But many experts see this as cosmetic. The rebranding game. So HTS now presents itself as not linked to Al-Qaeda, at least on paper, focused on governing Idlib, which is Syria, providing local services, and they say they're a moderate opposition forces in contrast to ISIS. So I guess ISIS was not moderate, it was extreme. So they're a moderate. So this new guy actually was Al-Qaeda, and then he became ISIS, okay? So, despite al-Nusra's ties with Al-Qaeda's origins, HTS has received indirect support from Turkey works with HTS to control that area of Syria. The U.S. and other Western actors, they tolerate HTS's rule because it keeps Assad and them at bay in Russia, right? We're still afraid of Russia over there, right? So this is a story, right? So HTS, even though the group's origins are Al-Qaeda, so then I looked up Al-Jolani appeared clean-shaven in a suit in PBS Frontline show in 2021 interview claiming, we are not a threat to the West. We are not Al-Qaeda. So media and some think tanks began presenting him as a possible stabilizer for the area of Syria. So what's the bottom line? The supposed new ruler in part of Syria is ex-Al-Qaeda, okay? The West and Turkey now treat him as a lesser evil or acceptable power. Another example of how today's terrorists can become tomorrow's partners when geopolitics shifts. So the big fight is this. ISIS opposes Iran, okay? So they oppose Iran, according to them, because of religious conflict. ISIS is an extremist Sunni group that views Shia Muslims as apostates who should be killed. Iran is the world's largest Shia majority country. ISIS propaganda regularly brands Iran's government and its allies as the worst kind of infidel. Regional power struggle. Iran actively fought against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. This is where it gets confusing because remember, the U.S. is playing both sides, so they're all, well, let's put it this way. Ever since they broke up the Middle East, and I've talked about this endlessly, what was it, right after World War I or around the Ottoman Empire thing? Look, according to his story, right? They went in and they reorganized all of the borders in that region and essentially put in all of their own people, right? So, okay, and so then to present this image that all these people, these different countries are all really fighting each other is kind of crazy, right? But it's really what's going on. Uh, so Iran actively fought ISIS when they were in Iraq and Syria. Iran has backed militias like Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces and Iran's military advisors, especially from the IRGC, that Soleimani guy, were key in defeating ISIS on the ground. So, examples of the ISIS-Iran conflict. ISIS carried out terrorist attacks inside Iran. So, some may think that Iran and ISIS are connected because of the region's tangled alliances and covert operations, but Iran just publicly seems to view ISIS as a direct threat. And ISIS wants to destroy Iran's influence in the region. See why some people in Iran may want to shoot down the plane of the U.S. CIA guy because I don't know if everybody sees what side everybody's on, but if you live in that region, you certainly could look at the destruction and think, well, that guy's got to go, right? So I'm not saying it was good that they killed him. I'm not saying they even killed him. I'm just saying that story led me to this crazy thing about Mauritanians. So anyway, then my reasoning, because remember I've said I've been feeding all of my notes into ChatGPT because then I can have actual conversations with them. So according to them, this is my reasoning. If ISIS is a USA proxy, or at least was created, enabled, or used by US strategies, and ISIS violently opposes Iran, then ISIS violently opposes Iran, then the US is, through ISIS or otherwise, acting against Iran, right? So the US is against Iran. This is openly visible, right? The U.S. has long seen Iran as an enemy state, especially since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. But remember, the British and U.S. governments installed Khomeini into power in 1979. So whatever's going on in Iran, what I'm trying to say is completely controlled at this point by the U.S., right? Because they installed the people in Iran they're claiming that they want to fight and get rid of. Okay. And I've got the articles all for you to take a look further. It's like, I've read all these articles and yeah, it's interesting, but it just shows how these people do nothing but sit around and a lot of them take drugs and they just come up with these war games kind of theories, right? Somebody's got to die today, right? So, the U.S. has led sanctions against and had regime change efforts and military actions and the U.S. supposedly assassinated Qasem Soleimani, which I don't believe they did. The U.S. allies, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE also see Iran as a regional threat, and U.S. policy often aligns with their goal to contain or weaken Iran. So ISIS and U.S. interests sometimes overlapping against Iran and its allies. In Syria, the USA wanted to overthrow Assad, an Iranian ally. ISIS fought Assad's regime and Hezbollah. Remember, Hezbollah is awful U.S. So ISIS fought Assad's regime and Hezbollah. This indirectly served U.S. interests at times. Declassified documents, for example, a 2012 DIA memo noted that the rise of a Salafist principality could be used against Assad. The U.S. officially fought both ISIS and Iran-backed forces in different places. Sometimes U.S. actions helped ISIS directly. For example, destabilization, arming Syrian rebels with links to extremism. But the U.S. also led coalitions to bomb ISIS. It's not that ISIS equal USA, but rather ISIS emerged from a mess the U.S. helped create and at times served U.S. geopolitical goals before being targeted as a threat. Let's see how we go full circle. So the U.S. has long sought to weaken Iran's influence, and at times groups like ISIS, which the U.S. helped enable through its wars and interventions, served that purpose, whether directly intended or not. So the U.S. presents itself as Iran's enemy. Have you seen the social media lately? These people look like their eyes are going to bug out of their heads. They're going to have war with Iran today. Did you see what Netanyahu said? I mean, they're losing the top part of their heads. Hey, hold your wigs on. This is all drama, okay? So let me keep this straight here. So at first glance, it does look like the U.S. is against Iran because the U.S. presents itself as its enemy and has had sanctions since 1979, escalating at time. And remember, in 1979, the U.S. and the British put in the guy in power in Iran. So the U.S. also, the designation of Iran as a part of the axis of evil in 2002. Assassination of key figures like the Soleimani guy in 2020. Russian intelligence sources have claimed that Michael D'Andrea, head of CIA operations in Iran, and who orchestrated the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, was killed in a heavy U.S. military presence in Gulf states aimed at containing Iran. So Russians are saying that Michael D'Andrea, the CIA guy they got, was assassinated by the, wait a minute. So what they're saying, Russians are saying that Michael D'Andrea, the guy who's married to the wealthy woman who came from the place that sounded like Mauritania. So Michael D'Andrea, head of CIA operation, he was the one who had orchestrated. Okay, so they claim that he orchestrated the assassination of Soleimani and was killed in a heavy U.S. military presence in Gulf states. Is he dead or not? I don't know. So they say that the plane with the U.S. Air Force markings reportedly served as the CIA's mobile command for D'Andrea, who earned special nicknames, including Ayatollah Mike, the Dark Prince, and the Undertaker. So yeah, did he organize Soleimani's death? Well, I don't think Soleimani's really dead. So see how it all can start to get very confusing. So, because I did a whole show about this, Iran is a major regional drug hub. Iran lies on the opium and heroin trafficking route from Afghanistan to Europe called the, let me see here, Balkan route, okay? Large quantities of drugs move through Iran despite official claims of serious seizures and execution of traffickers. Many reports suggest elements within Iran's security or military, you think so? From the drug trade, or at least allow it to persist as part of regional power games. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. has bases completely surrounding Iran, okay? The U.S. has bases in Afghanistan, Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. They completely circle Iran. Iran would have to be either suicidal or insane to threaten the United States because it would take 1 second for those U.S. planes to be right there on Iran. But They're just there because all they have to do then is pick up the freight of the drugs coming out of Iran, put them on those planes that the U.S. has right along the border there, just like they're ordering all the smuggling along these borders and stuff. So yeah, this is not complicated stuff, right? So you got conveniently all your U.S. Air Force planes there, right there where your drug hub is, ready to fly out the goods, right? So they take them from there and route them wherever they're going to take them. So yeah, so Iran and the U.S. sometimes benefit from the same chaos. During the Iraq War, the U.S. toppled Saddam, Iran's enemy, and then Iran gained influence. During the Afghan War, the Taliban was weakened. Iran benefits from a weakened neighbor. ISIS rise and fall. The U.S. and Iran both fought ISIS, but the chaos strengthened Iran's role in Iraq and Syria. See how it all works? Look over there, and over here, the theater is doing something else, right? This is a circus act. Both the U.S. and Iran benefit from controlling instability. U.S. keeps arms sales flowing to Gulf states. Iran justifies its own military buildup and influence in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. So why does this seem suspect? The U.S. and Iran publicly denounce each other, but Iran's drugs flows, regional influence, and enemy status helps justify U.S. military spending and bases. The U.S. never eliminates Iran's regime despite surrounding it and having the capacity to. Iran and the U.S. act as enemies, and their rivalry sustains the military-industrial complex and regional power structures. So what happened was this the U.S. actions that helped ISIS rise. So 1979, and keep in mind, when I get over to the next section here, the trafficking routes, what I'll be talking about, how these little things I'm going to be talking about now will fit into the next section here. So how has the U.S. helped ISIS? Well, 1979 to 1989, the U.S. funded anti-Soviet jihad in Afghanistan. It was called Operation Cyclone. They used CIA funds, trains, and arms Mujahideen fighters. Many later joined Al-Qaeda or similar groups. Bin Laden and Arab volunteers gained battlefield experience and global jihad networks formed. That was during 1979 to 1989. So then 2003, the U.S. invasion of Iraq. The U.S. topples Saddam Hussein, dismantles the Iraq army, and bans the Ba'ath Party members from power. This creates mass unemployment among experienced military officers. Many later joined insurgencies and, of course, ISIS. 2004 to 2006. AQI grows out of chaos of U.S.-occupied Iraq. U.S. military prisons, for example, Camp Bucca, become networking hubs where jihadists and former Ba'athists build ISIS leadership corps. 2011, U.S.-led NATO war in Libya destabilized the whole region. The fall of Gaddafi unleashes arms and fighters across North Africa and the Middle East. Weapons and militants flow toward Syria. 2011 to 2013, the U.S. and allies armed the Syrian rebels. The U.S. and Gulf allies supply weapons to anti-Assad rebels. Many weapons end up with the extremist groups, including Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, and ISIS. Isn't that convenient? Oh, here you go. Here, we'll just give you all these weapons. U.S. prioritizes regime change over controlling extremist growth. 2012, declassified U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency report depicts or arguably welcomes the rise of the Salafist entity. And they say there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime. What they're talking about, supporting powers, were identified as Western countries, Gulf states, and Turkey in the document. So in 2014, ISIS declares caliphate. ISIS takes Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, largely using equipment captured from U.S. trained Iraqi forces who collapsed without a fight. Isn't that convenient? U.S. interventions created conditions for ISIS to rise and seize power. So I dug up some key quotes from official or declassified reports. 2012, there was a DIA memo that was declassified in 2015, and it said the West Gulf countries and Turkey support the opposition, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. The possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want. And there was a quote by Colin Powell. Remember Colin Powell? He was caught in a email leak. ISIL is created with money from our friends and allies to fight Hezbollah. Right out of their own mouths, right? There was U.S. Senate testimony. General Michael Flynn, former DIA head, in 2015, he said, the question was, you saw the DIA analyst. Did you come to the conclusion that those supporting the opposition wanted a Salafist principality to be created? He said, yes, that was a willful decision. There was a CIA report in 1986, report on arming jihadists, which has now been declassified. It said the Islamic resistance in Afghanistan is a legitimate anti-Soviet force, but could, in time, pose a security threat to the region if not managed carefully. So they say that the U.S. didn't create ISIS deliberately, but its war and occupation destabilized entire regions. Its policies enabled extremists to organize and gain weapons. See, where have we heard this before? Kind of like, oh, look over there, right? So I have a whole list of this timeline. All of you take a look at down below. So let's talk now about snuff films. Now that we're finally back to the trafficking part, right? So what are snuff films? The history and controversy of snuff films. A snuff film refers to a genre or video that claims to show the real, intentional killing of a person on camera, typically for profit or sadistic entertainment. The term snuff originates from the act of extinguishing a flame, symbolically representing the extinguishing of life. You snuff them out. The first known use of the term snuff movie appeared in Ed Sanders' 1971 book, The Story of Charles Manson. So he alleged without proof that the Manson family filmed one of its murders. However, the idea of film killing predates this, because in 1907, here again, an interesting date, right? Writer Ghislaine published a good film depicting a staged murder filmed to satisfy the public's morbid fascination with crime. Film critic Jeffrey O'Brien suggested that snuff is implicit in B-movie tropes, such as the mad artist who murders his models in films like A Bucket of Blood, 1959, and Color Me Blood Red, from 1965. The 1976 film Snuff, marketed as showing a real murder, fueled public panic. Later investigations revealed it was a hoax aimed at boosting ticket sales. So, how did this all get hidden? Well, law enforcement stands in contradictions. Since the 1970s, law enforcement agencies have maintained that no commercially distributed snuff films where a murder is staged for profit has been verified. However, this position often conflicts with evidence of murder videos circulated for sadistic or ideological reasons. So let's go through a timeline. In the 1970s, the snuff film myth emerges in media, sparking moral panic. No official law enforcement statements yet. 1980s, Scotland Yard, FBI, and others publicly dismissed snuff films as urban legend, citing lack of evidence. Contradictions. Some serial killers record murders, and internal documents later show police took the possibility of snuff films more seriously in private than in public. 1992 is where that guy that I found a few years ago, Scotland Yard declares there is no evidence anywhere in the world that genuine snuff movies exist. Contradiction. Around this time, international operations against child abuse material uncover murder footage, but is not classified as snuff because of the absence of a profit motive. So, yeah, there's always a trick, right? So they can make that claim because they classified snuff as something that had to be profitable, right? Well, this one that they had didn't show profit, so of course they could just ignore that one, right? So still in 1999, Interpol and Scotland Yard restate that snuff films are myth. And here again, more contradictions. Cases such as those as this guy in Japan, the U.S. involve real murder videos, though not labeled commercial stuff. So 2003 to 2005, the UK and US agencies reaffirmed no evidence of snuff for profit films at conferences. The contradiction to that was leaked reports reveal concerns about the dark net enabling a new form of snuff-like material. 2010. Agencies maintain that no commercial snuff film exists. Contradiction. ISIS, get that in your head. ISIS execution videos, cartel murder footage, and alleged dark web pay-to-view torture streams complicate the distinction between snuff and other forms of filmed murder. 2020. Agencies like the UK National Crime Agency continue to describe snuff as myth. Contradiction. Arrests related to live-streamed torture and alleged murder for pay operations suggest elements of snuff-like activity exist, even if not recognized as such officially. So there was a couple murders. There was one in 2012. The murder film and post online circulated among gore site communities. There was an execution in 2000 and Mexican cartel executions. Real murders were filmed and distributed to terrorize, sometimes monetize via dark web ads. Peter Scully in 2014 filmed sadistic child abuse sold for profit. While no murders were proven on film, it represented snuff-like commerce. In 2007, they had the Russian maniacs. They murders filmed and posted online. Next was the dark net or red rooms alleged claims of pay-per-view torture or murder live stream persist, although verification is rare. There was a Christchurch mosque shooting in 2019 that was mass killings live streamed for an audience, highlighting how real murder is now produced for viewers, even absent direct profit. So why does law enforcement deny snuff film? Well, this is their exact pattern, right? Why did they deny the prohibition? Why did they deny the mafia was growing in the United States? Why did they deny the mafia was growing over in Amsterdam? This is their pattern, right? So why law enforcement denies snuff films? Authorities define snuff narrowly. A film produced for profit where the murder is committed specifically for the camera. And here's what they exclude. Murders recorded for other motives, like ideological or thrill. They also exclude murders filmed and monetized after the fact. Well, they really sit around in rooms and dream up stuff, don't they? They also exclude sadistic abuse that stops short of murder. So let's talk about ISIS. I've talked briefly about this, but I'll give you some more extended information. ISIS, the symbolism and related controversies. ISIS, the ancient goddess. Isis was a revered Egyptian goddess associated with motherhood, magic, and protection. Her worship spread beyond Europe into the Roman Empire. She is depicted with outstretched wings and a throne-shaped headdress, often nursing her son Horus. Critics and conspiracy researchers claim that secret societies or elite circles invoke Isis symbolism, linking it to ancient mystery religions. So then we have ISIS, the terror group. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria is called ISIS, arose from post-Iraq war chaos. Analysts argue U.S. foreign policy, including arming rebel groups, indirectly enabled its rise. Some suggest that intelligence agencies manipulated the group's growth to justify military and surveillance expansion. And then we have the Statue of Liberty and the ISIS symbolism. While officially representing the Roman goddess Libertas, the Statue of Liberty design was influenced by Egyptian monument art. Some researchers argue its torch and crown echo ISIS imagery and propose the statue encodes ancient goddess symbolism, reflecting hidden elite traditions. So, what's this all about? The idea of snuff films has remained a potent mix of myth, fear, and documented horror. While law enforcement continues to assert that no true commercial snuff films exist, real cases of film murder and abuse for consumption or indirect profit challenges that position. The debate is further complicated by technological change, dark web markets, and the symbolic manipulation of ancient archetypes in modern culture. So, ISIS was not that hard. They got origins of ISIS and its links to Al-Qaeda. So in 1999, they formed in Jordan. 2004, the group pledges allegiance to Osama bin Laden and becomes known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. 2006, AQI merges with other insurgent groups and forms the Islamic State of Iraq, or ISIS. 2013, it's ISIL. They call it ISIL or ISIS. For some reason, when you hear Barack Obama, he always says ISIL. He always calls it ISIL, but other people call it ISIS. But I'm not going to get too hung up on it. We can't get into the weeds on this deal and go through it all, right? So you'll see it used two different ways. So 2014, ISIS declares renaming itself the Islamic State, or IS, and breaks ties with Al-Qaeda because of ideological and strategic differences. So now Al-Qaeda disowns ISIS in 2014. So is the U.S. Al-Qaeda? This idea comes from a mix. Historical evidence of U.S. involvement in creating conditions for Al-Qaeda to rise. So we've already talked about those. Yeah, all of the conditions were set for Al-Qaeda to rise, right? And I have every little detail you want to go into down below, because what I'm trying to get to is the part about why all these people are doing all the trafficking, right? But another key point, naturally, I had to look because remember, the drug routes are along the same routes as the U.S. military bases. So I looked to see where are these people called ISIS? Where they hang around, right? So I looked at ISIS and the proximity to military bases. So actually, in Iraq, during ISIS's rise from 2013 to 2014, in strongholds like Mosul, Tikrit, and Fallujah were often near or within areas of heavy U.S. and coalition military involvement. especially since the U.S. had bases and influence after the 2003 invasion. Some bases were near or inside contested zones. So in Syria, ISIS controlled large areas of eastern Syria, including Raqqa and this other place near U.S. bases. So yeah, I mean, they are, they are, they say military presence and conflict zone. Extremist groups often thrive in contested regions where state control is weak or contested, often the same place where foreign military bases exist. The presence of military bases and interventions sometimes contribute to instability, which extremist groups exploit. So they have no direct evidence. While ISIS's territory was often near military bases, there is no publicly verified evidence that the U.S. deliberately created or controlled ISIS. Instead, military actions and policies had complex and sometimes destabilizing consequences. So, ISIS grew in regions heavily affected by war and foreign military presence, including near some U.S. and coalition bases. This proximity is a function of geography, conflict zones, and power vacuums rather than confirmed intentional creation by the U.S. military or intelligence agencies. So, yeah, so that's why they have it there. So, yeah, there's a reason for all this. Okay, let's look at the human trafficking and exploitation in underground videos. Okay, the traffic victims often kidnapped. This is key. Traffic victims are often kidnapped or sold, are frequently forced into sexual exploitation on camera, including extreme and violent content. These videos may be shared in closed criminal networks, sometimes resembling snuff material. Reports from law enforcement and NGOs indicate that many victims are unaware they are being filmed or coerced into being participating. Well, I think most of them are not, they don't have any choice in the matter, okay? They are under the control of these people. And I believe that they have set up much more sophisticated operations. And I can't even get there right now. So let me keep going here. Because official positions historically say that commercially produced snuff films have not been conclusively verified to exist. See, oh, we don't see anything here, nothing to see here. So, however, law enforcement does acknowledge trafficking victims are subject to horrific abuse, including filming of sexual violence, torture, and murder attempts in underground circles. I did find some links that FBI and Interpol reports on child exploitation highlights that trafficked children often appear in videos documenting abuse, sometimes including fatal violence. The Polaris Project and other anti-trafficking NGOs document that traffickers exploit victims to create graphic content to blackmail or extort money from buyers or to exert control. Some investigative journalists and survivors describe how trafficked individuals are filmed for snuff or torture videos in criminal black markets, but the films rarely enter commercial or public channels due to their illicit nature. So, scholarly research emphasizes the overlap between trafficking networks and the production of extreme underground pornography, which may include murder or torture. A 2014 study by a human rights organization noted that while commercial snuff films are mostly urban myth, real victims trafficked for extreme abuse and filmed non-consensually exist within organized crime. Most victims in snuff-like or extreme abuse videos are believed to be trafficked or stolen persons. The commercial snuff films market remains largely unproven, but trafficking victims are undoubtedly subject to horrific abuses recorded for criminal use. So, let me scroll down here a second. Oh, I have this. Let me get back to this ISIS thing again here. How does this tie into ISIS? ISIS reportedly operated slave markets and brothels in territories it controlled, just as covert networks historically operated in war zones under U.S. sphere of influence. ISIS's crimes served as a horror story that justified more U.S. and NATO military intervention while masking deep networks of trafficking. ISIS grew in regions heavily affected by war and foreign military presence, including near some U.S. and coalition bases. This proximity is a function of geography, conflict zone. The situation is complex, involving regional, national, and international actors. Yes, they keep it complicated, right? That's all on purpose. See, let me see, give me a second here. And of course, we have wars. What do we have going on constantly, right? Wars provide cover for trafficking of weapons, drugs, children, women, and cultural artifacts. With the chaos of war provides plausible deniability. Who's to say what was ISIS versus Black Ops versus Mafia versus local gangs? ISIS reportedly operated slave markets and territories. I think I already read that part. So yeah, ISIS is the one that's controlling all those slave markets and stuff, right? So does ISIS have a double meaning? Yes, I believe it does. I believe ISIS is from their god. I've talked extensively about ISIS in the past. So, yeah, I'm very certain that there's a reason why it's called ISIS, right? It's not like just nothing's going on. And I dug up a bunch of reports if you want to take a look at them. I mean, if you want to write a book about this stuff, I've given you your first 100 chapters. So, okay, here's where I got the Italians into this thing. I was reading along when I was trying to figure out these routes, and my eyes popped out of my head because reports highlight ties between the Italian Ndrangheta, the tomato people, and ISIS, notably large-scale tramadol shipments. So the Italian, the gangsters, the mafia, Ndrangheta, the tomato people, they're transporting large shipments of tramadol. Let me see, ISIS-K, which is in some other province of Afghanistan, they engage in opiate trades, heroin and opium, and tax poppy farmers to bolster revenue. Yeah, they're into everything, right? And I found a report from the CIA FOIA release, International Trafficking in Women to the United States. While not ISIS specific, it talks about, trafficking women around, but, I'm not sure I believe most of these reports and stuff, but hey, at least they're out there, right? And you never know if you dig through these reports. Like, I didn't know that. I had no idea the Italians were involved in ISIS. I was reading along and I read that one specific line that brought me all the way back around, right? So, anyhow, yeah, I'm going to keep scrolling along here because I have just so much detail I have a lot about the Yazidis. I didn't know what they were or what kind of people they were. They're Kurdish people. So I have a map of where they are and their whole history down below. So, they've been persecuted supposedly because their faith is misunderstood. And Yazidis have been targeted for centuries by Ottoman rulers, extremist groups, and recently ISIS, who tried to wipe them out through mass killings, enslavement, and forced conversions. So they sold girls that were underage because ISIS considered them permissible under Islamic law. They always use the law, right? But what would they do without these lawyers? They wouldn't be able to do much, right? So all kinds. I have more if you want to. ISIS has abducted, systematically raped, and abused thousands of women and children, some as young as 8 years old. So yeah, there's lots of reasons when I come back, because boys were taken as young as 7 for use as child soldiers, while girls were sold as sexual slaves or given as rewards for militants. A market selling Yazidi hostages posted on the messaging app grew with impunity across the Islamic State's caliphate from 2014 to its fall in 2019. In addition to the charges already brought against platform boss Pavel Dubrow in France, complicity in crimes against humanity could be added. So, yeah, there is just a lot of horror surrounding these people. So they traffic drugs. That Captagon is a really big drug over there in Syria. And there were all kinds of facilities they found after Assad, well, after he hopped on a plane and took off, right? So, and that's where I found the Italians there because it said ISIS trafficked tramadol, Captagon, and taxed opium and heroin, sometimes collaborating with criminal networks like the Ndrangheta. So yeah, and that brought me all back around. So anyway, I have different UN reports that detail and document ISIS's mass abduction and sexual slavery and the trafficking of the Yezidi women and girls, the systematic approach, the U.S. Department of State. So yeah, I have all of those down below. But let me tell you this: you're probably thinking, "Well, let's bring this to court. Let's sue them." Well, you have to understand the court. So while I have your attention here, I thought let me share my file about the ICC, the criminal courts, right? The people that everybody relies on to straighten this mess out. Well, I wouldn't put too much weight in any of this. So, the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. ICC investigations into ISIS crimes, including enslavement and trafficking, as war crimes and crimes against humanity. There are also documented patterns of sexual violence and child exploitation, details of ongoing efforts to gather evidence and pursue prosecutions. They also highlight cooperation with local and international partners. So, well, what's a conflict? Well, lots of conflicts, right? And I also have some ICC and UN accountability mechanisms. So let's talk about the ICC first, okay? Oh, by the way, they're also talking about a resurgence of ISIS. I just pulled up a memo today. Let me get this up. Okay, let's talk about, so I can close out this file, the International Law Commission and the path to the ICC. This is how it worked. 1945, the United Nations is founded. The UN Charter includes a mandate to promote the progressive development of codification of international law, Article 13. 1947, the International Law Commission, or the ILC, is established by the UN General Assembly. Its task is to assist in the development and codification of international law. 1948 to 1950, the ILC begins work on key legal topics, including the Nuremberg Principles, state responsibilities, and the law of treaties. 1969, the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties is adopted based on the ILC drafts. 1994, the ILC completes a draft statute for an international criminal court and submits it to the UN General Assembly. 1996 to 1998, preparation committees work on refining the ILC's draft. The UN convenes diplomatic conferences to negotiate the statute. 7 July 1998, they adopted what is called the Rome Statute. Why don't they just call it the Roma Statute for the Roma Gypsies? So in 1998, the Rome Statute is adopted by 120 states at a conference in Rome. The Rome Statute is largely based on the ILC's draft. Then on July 1, 2002, the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, is formally established when the Rome Statute enters into force after 60 states ratify it. So until January 2002, nothing was there about any of this stuff, right? It disappeared out of the air via the UN. So when you start talking about the ICC, their founding comes from the UN. So 2000 to the present, the ILC continues to work on related topics, such as crimes against humanity. So who voted on the Rome Statute? Well, there were 120 states that voted in favor of adopting the Rome Statute, which led to the creation of the ICC. So you see where this is going? So you think you could really trust the ICC? Okay. So this is the most interesting part to me at least, who voted against it? Well, of course, the United States, Israel, China, Iraq, Libya, Qatar. So, funny they voted against it, right? List of states that voted in favor, the 120, I'm not going to go through all 120, but most of Europe, most of Africa, most of Latin America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. So those people wanted it, and the US, Israel, China, Iraq, Qatar, and Yemen, of all people, are against it. So after adoption, the Rome Statute was open for signatures and ratification. The ICC entered into force on 1 July 2002 once 60 countries had ratified the treaty. And with that, I'm going to be saying goodbye for now because I will be coming back with all this trafficking stuff about these routes and where the filming is being done and all that. But I really felt like I needed to break this part out because I can no longer do really long shows. So you get the drift. So anyways, be safe out there and I'll chat with you real soon. Goodbye for now.